recording as well.
Well, I'm going to say hi before the meeting starts. Hi, Lucy. Hi, Margaret. Good to
We can't
see
see
you.
you.
And
We can't
there's
see you.
Joanna. Oh,
Hi.
the big star. You must be the big star.
I am. Is this my moment in the sun?
I'm not going to say any more after that. I'll keep quiet.
We can't see you, Bob.
Oh, you can't?
I see just
I
a
thought.
corner. I think you're. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Well, now we can see you a little bit.
Yeah, there's. I know you can't see me here. How's that better? There I go.
Yeah. Good to see you. Let's give everyone a minute to get online. Margaret, can we check that we can see that you have a share screen ability too?
I do. If I do that right now, though, it'll kick off the screen that we have right now.
Okay. You've already checked that.
Yes.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Great.
Thank you. Thanks, Odom.
Hey, Joanna.
Hey. Mary, can we hear from you? Make sure we can hear your voice as well.
Hello, hello.
Great. How about Mary?
Hello.
Great. Christy?
Hi.
Great, we can hear you. Bianca, we heard you earlier. Adam, can we check we can hear you?
Yes.
Great. Sean?
Sorry, I was just sending links to Mark and John Primuth.
Great.
So that you don't see me working feverishly, I'm going to continue to make sure that folks are logging in.
Great. Holly, can we check your mic?
Can you hear me?
We can, thanks.
Yes. Great.
Sally, welcome. Can we check your mic?
Hello.
Hi. Great, thanks. Hi, Dr. Schneider. Can we check your mic too? Can we check your mic?
Are you talking to me?
Yep, I am, and I see your hand is raised too. Thank you. I'll be right back. Hi, Joanne, welcome. Can we check your mic?
Yeah, but I don't see me and I came on a different way that other than Tamara's email.
We see you.
Oh,
And we hear you.
do I? I don't, let me see. Do I see
If
me?
you just check the view button on the far right top, you can have
View.
view and then you can scroll down.
Oh,
And
got it. Okay.
Hi, Mark, welcome.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Mark.
Hi. Hey, welcome back, Margaret.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
How's the baby?
Thankfully sleeping.
Yeah.
Can I announce one thing about our high school?
Please.
So my son, who's on the varsity baseball team, we played San Marino yesterday, and for the second season in a row, we beat them. And this time we blanked them out 7-0. So it's all happy news.
Congrats.
And then keep doing that. So what that'll do is it will, when it starts to crash, we'll know what caused it. You can say, oh, I was breaking, or I was parenting, or whatever, you know, so we can get a better idea to narrow it down. Because you know what the next step is. The next one. I know.
Well, it's 3:05. What do you think we get started? I want to be respectful of people's time.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Hi, Diana.
Hi. Well, on behalf of Councilmember Donovan and all who have worked on SB 381, welcome and thank you to all participating today. For decades, the Caltrans homes have been a concern and source of controversy in our community. Now, with the permanent and threatened construction of the freeway through our town, we hope to address the 68 remaining homes owned by Caltrans as expeditiously as possible. This is important to restoring the fabric of our small community. While we have long heard residents' complaints about Caltrans, the concerns became more acute when Caltrans homes in El Sereno were broken into and occupied on Thanksgiving Eve. Unoccupied homes were subsequently patrolled by Caltrans and a private security company. On January 28th, Council members Donovan and Primuth, together with interim city manager Joyce, met with concerned residents regarding the unoccupied homes owned by Caltrans, who requested that the city do something regarding those homes. At that time, it was thought the city could replicate what it had done almost 20 years ago with the Berkshire property, and Sean hired the consultant Adam Elison, who facilitated that transaction between Caltrans and the city. Unfortunately, we have since learned that due to changes in the Verdi Act caused by a bill authored by Senator Carol Liu, it is no longer possible to duplicate that transaction. Working with our consultant, we have developed an initial proposal reflected in SB 381, which has since been improved by subsequent critique and comment received from community members. At the April 7th City Council meeting, our council members suggested further engagement with the community to hear its concerns regarding the bill and suggestion of alternatives, which we are happy to do. However, before we start that discussion, we thought it would be useful to identify the problems the 68 homes pose for our community. It's always helpful to first identify the problems that are intended to be resolved by various proposals. In a prior conversation, Sean Joyce and Mark Gallatin agreed that Joanna Hancomer would serve as a very useful facilitator for our discussion today. And so, what do you see as the more pressing problems caused by the Caltrans homes?
Great. Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping as far as our facilitation here. For the benefit of those who don't know me, I'm Joanna Hankhammer, the Director of Planning and Community Development. I'll be facilitating the meeting today with the goals of hearing a proposal from the South Pasadena Preservation Foundation and the panel about the future of the houses that Caltrans owns in South Pasadena, and to take note of the range of possible solutions to the problems that they exist under Caltrans control, and ultimately building consensus on as many items as we can today, with the assumption we'll continue to have future opportunities to do so. The community has previously heard from the city subcommittee's proposal on how we could gain more local control through SB 381 to address the problems. So should anyone on the panel have questions about that proposal or the thinking behind it, the subcommittee is available to answer questions. Christy Lopez from Senator Portantino's office is also available to provide insight where needed. To start us off, Mark Gallatin, the president of the South Pasadena Preservation Foundation, will present the foundation's proposed amendments to SB 381. To facilitate consensus building where possible, I'll ask Mark to revisit each amendment one at a time, each followed by a full discussion with the panel. I ask the panelists that they raise their hands, either using the Zoom function or your actual hand, so I can call on each participant, and staff will be taking notes on the discussion surrounding each proposed amendment. And before proceeding to the next amendment, staff will share screens for the participants to review the notes. These notes will also be summarized in a staff report prior to the same topic being consideration by the City Council next week on April 21st. Also, the meeting is open for the public to listen and pose questions or comments in the chat. Staff is monitoring the chat as well. And while the primary objective of today's meeting is to hear from the assembled panel, we'll be monitoring questions and comments, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. If not today, then during the presentation at next week's council meeting. For anyone who is unable to attend today, this meeting will be posted online. So with that housekeeping complete, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Mark Gallatin to begin his proposals.
I think there was a prior agreement, and Sean, I wasn't party to it, so maybe if you or Mark could speak to that agreement to discuss what are the identified problems. I'd also just like to note that we have some participants with us who are not specifically associated with the Preservation Foundation. And of course, I want to make sure that they know that they are invited to participate fully at any time.
Yes, Joanna, do you mind facilitating for 10 minutes or so, just a brief discussion, certainly everybody the time that they need, but a brief discussion of what the problems are perceived to be, so that the discussion that follows is addressing the problems.
Sure, absolutely.
Or
So,
that there's confidence that they are.
sure. I'll just go in order of the talking heads on my screen, if you don't mind. Bianca Richards, will you just start? Do you have some, if there are particular problems that you believe are key to addressing in this forum today and in the long opportunity? And I see that Joanne has got her hand up next.
Excuse me, Chris Sutton isn't able to get on with either of the links that were sent. Could somebody send him the correct one, please?
And I have nothing to comment on right at this point.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll do it by hand then. How about Odom Stamps?
You're muted, Odom.
You're muted.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Our subcommittee named a spokesman, that our subcommittee of the South Pasadena Preservation Foundation, and Mark and I discussed it. And if I may, I'd like to read a prepared statement from our subcommittee, which includes input from the United Caltrans tenants, but it really summarizes all of the positions that we have come to advocate and talk about today, if I may.
Sure.
All right. The South Pasadena Preservation Foundation Subcommittee on the Caltrans properties would like to thank the City Council, the interim city manager, and the city staff for providing this much needed forum to discuss the future of the Caltrans 710 corridor in South Pasadena. While our proposal presented at our community forum on March 25th, 2021 still stands, we welcome the opportunity to discuss our priorities and to clarify our position on SB 381. We would like to first acknowledge that our work on this issue has emerged directly from our decades of experience working both with and against Caltrans over the years, and includes contributions and insights from tenants, longtime freeway fighters, legal advocates, and committed preservationists. It represents, to the best of our abilities, stakeholders within the South Pasadena community. It also is a direct response to the ongoing inaction of Caltrans and the apparent unwillingness of the agency to complete their own 710 corridor sales program. Our proposal differs from the approach taken by the City Council subcommittee in that South Pasadena Preservation Foundation strongly believes that there is an opportunity here for a non-legislative solution that best furthers our mission of facilitating the preservation of South Pasadena's historic heritage. We would like to see the city of South Pasadena join together with Senator Portantino in negotiations with the California Transportation Commission and Caltrans to transfer managing control of the 710 sales program to the local level. We believe that existing law allows for such a solution, that it is within the purview of the CTC to approve it, and we welcome the opportunity to discuss this further when we meet, which is now. Once these agreements are complete, South Pasadena will have control over the rental, maintenance, repair, and sales of the 710 properties. The city will use existing laws and regulations to execute these sales with no involvement of Caltrans staff, but with the approval of the CTC. No legislation is required for this agreement to take place, and no upfront acquisition costs will be incurred by the city. The city will retain all rents and sales proceeds as compensation for their service to Caltrans in managing, repairing, and selling the properties, and will retain all funds generated. Our priority is to get the 710 corridor sales program away from Caltrans as soon as possible and into local control so that an effective and equitable process can be undertaken by the city. The proposal is predicated on the leadership of our city council and our senator, who has offered exceptional deference to the city's needs. It is from this perspective that we view SB 381 as a potential means to codify the goals and intent of our proposal, if we agree that the bill is regarded as a parallel strategy to successful negotiations. Pending legislation must not dilute, delay, or confuse the priorities of the community. And as we have said before, no bill is better than a bad bill. SB 381 must substantially include the points raised here, as well as a number of amendments that are incorporated into our non-legislative strategy. These include the following points: expand the agreements to cover all 3 cities in accordance with existing Roberti law, guarantee all current tenants, residential, nonprofit, commercial, an absolute priority to purchase their property, require signed agreements delivered to the CTC for every sale, detailing either waiver or enforcement of absolute priority to purchase, whether that right is held by the city, the existing tenant, or a nonprofit. Cancel all illicit debts, penalties, and disputes alleged by Caltrans right-of-way records. All tenants should be granted good standing. Guarantee affordable housing and share equity mortgage assistance to all Caltrans tenants. Prioritize the creation of cooperatives and land trusts for housing, open space, and gardens. Require the creation of a community land trust as the city-approved nonprofit housing-related entity, the HRE. Commit that no lot splits or zone changes other than those mandated by present or future state law will be granted to Caltrans surplus properties in the residential estate and residential single-family zones, and in the Altus de Monterey overlay zone, that no demolitions of existing homes will take place in these zones. Prohibit the subleasing of properties governed by an affordability covenant and imposition of miscellaneous fees by an HRE, such that the total cost of renting the unit becomes unaffordable. Establish a timeline for completion of the sales program. We are confident that by convening all the stakeholders, oops, I'm getting cut off in that last paragraph. Basically, we can come together and make progress on this and hopefully get to a point where we can all agree and go forward with the best elements of the stakeholders brought together to follow the Roberti law.
Thank you, Odom. So before we get into maybe addressing the points that were included in your statement, does anyone else have a statement they'd like to say before we get into? Mark?
Yes, thank you, Joanna. I just wanted, for everybody's benefit, since I guess Odom's version got cut off there, just read the last the last paragraph of our
Thanks.
position statement, which reads as follows. Our priority is to get the 710 corridor sales program away. Oops, sorry, wrong page. We are confident that by convening all the stakeholders in this matter of crucial importance to the community to identify problems and propose solutions in a spirit of cooperation and collaboration, great things are possible. We hope that you share our vision that pursuing this path will result in an outcome that is homegrown, community-based, and equitable. Perhaps most importantly, it would follow in the long tradition of residents, interest groups, city staff, and elected officials coming together to develop creative solutions to shared challenges, which are uniquely tailored to our community. This is what so many proudly refer to as the South Pasadena Way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Is there anyone else who would like to start off with a statement? Joanne? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm not starting off. I'm just wanted to make sure there was enough time to discuss Diana's statement about the side-by-side escrow for 2002 Berkshire being illegal or you can't do it. I think that is a misinterpretation of a section of that 2012 law. And Chris Sutton and I have discussed it, and we would like time down the road sometime in this meeting to clarify that and tell you that it is doable. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Chris Sutton, I see that your hand is raised. What I wanted to do is go through the 10 points that were just included in the statement that was put together by the Preservation Foundation. And if what you want to say is not included in any of these 10 points, then we'll have some time. We'll make sure to leave some time at the end of the discussion. Is that agreeable that we just start with the first point, which is to expand the agreements to cover all 3 cities in accordance with existing Roberti law? Mark?
Joanna, I just want to point out also that the bullet points in our statement are not in any particular order. So it's not by priority necessarily.
Okay, would you like to propose a different, I'm happy to propose a different priority. I've just got them here listed. So
No,
I would just go
I'm
from,
fine with going through them in the order listed. I just want everybody to understand they're not in a priority order.
Okay. Okay, so
Thank
let's take the first one and I'll read it again. Expand the agreements to cover all 3 cities in accordance with existing Roberti law. And so, like I said before, if you would raise your hand and if you want to add something or to start off that conversation. Chris Sutton.
Yeah, my only brief point is that the Roberti law is not the entire universe of the laws which authorize these points to be adopted by agreement. 116 of the Streets and Highways Code and the generic sections governing the powers of the California Transportation Commission all provide greater flexibility in terms of delegating duties to the cities, creating other mechanisms that allow you to achieve a reasonable interpretation and compliance with the Rivera law. And so that there's a bigger universe of statutes that authorize greater flexibility, which allow these provisions to be adopted by agreement and not needing legislation. That's all.
Thank you, Chris. Does anyone else have anything to add about that? And I should say, I want to add, one of the reasons we're here is because of over the years, the way that Caltrans has implemented the Roberti bill has perhaps changed with changing staff. So if you have a comment about that too, I'd certainly like to hear it. Odom?
I
And then
began
Timothy?
my political action when I first bought my house, within a year of buying my house in 1994, after finding out that, in fact, it was on the route, and the route had just been signed by President Clinton in a record of decision to go through. It was not revealed when we bought the house that was the case. And very shortly after, I was brought up to speed by longtime freeway fighters, Citizens United to save South Pasadena. And we filed suit as a neighborhood when Caltrans tried to sell the houses in groups of 10 and 20 houses at one time. We reached a settlement when our neighborhood and the United Caltrans tenants sued Caltrans for the first batch of houses, and those were allowed to be sold to Esperanza Charities and Joe Borda funding Esperanza Charities. But no further bundling of houses was agreed to be done by Caltrans. And that was in the late 90s. Caltrans ignored this 10 years later when I served on the city council and again tried to bundle a large group of properties, this time to Beacon HRE, Beacon Charities. And that was in fact contested by the city, not by neighborhood groups, and prevailed shortly after I left council. That was under city attorney Dick Terzian. And yet here we are another 15 years down the road, and they're trying to do the same thing again. So we are vigilant about this because we have seen how Caltrans does not follow the Roberti law or bends it in ways that are almost unrecognizable.
Thank you, Odom. Timothy Iveson, did you have something to add?
Yeah, so I'm trying to kind of gather my thoughts here, but I wanted to speak to the first policy point, the three-city solution. I think there's various reasons why this is an important point. Probably a few reasons, but the main one, and not to sound too philosophical about it, is that Caltrans has created this corridor. Whether we like it or not, Caltrans planned the freeway, they bought up the houses, they managed them for so many years, and they created these conditions. And there's not much we can do about it. I mean, for example, I was explaining this to someone recently who compared it to the LA River and how in trying to rehabilitate the LA River, they have to deal with 37 different constituencies, 37 different legal entities. And I mean, the fact is, the LA River must be rehabilitated. It's an urgent issue. And those different corridor interests, must be dealt with. And I think in terms of the Caltrans housing, it's exactly the same. There's no way around it. It simply is a three-city corridor. And the Caltrans, from the Caltrans tenant perspective, I mean, I think it's in the name, right? It's United Caltrans Tenants. And we meet in Zoom meetings for the last year and a half with tenants from South Pasadena, from Pasadena and El Sereno. And we see our situation as a common situation. That's one reason. The other is that the Roberti law, which is, we're seeking to amend the Roberti law, and the Roberti law covers all three cities. And attempts to break it up into pieces has already started to cause problems. I mean, there's already a legal petition in front of the legislature that is challenging SB 51 and the logic of that bill in creating unequal rights across the corridor. And this is precisely why it was so important for Caltrans to solve this problem in the first place, right? This is a Caltrans problem. It is a state level issue. So for 3 individual cities to try to come up with 3 individual solutions is really, a bad compromise as far as I'm concerned. I mean, Chris might have other things to say about that, but I think at the legal level as well, it's problematic.
Thank you for that perspective. Joanne, you have your hands up?
Yes, I want to add that in a meeting, I think the beginning of December with Senator Portantino, Claire Bogard, and Christie, we were discussing the different issues, 626 Prospect and other housing issues. And I believe it was that meeting that Senator Portantino told us that the governor had told, I guess related to the Durazo bill, that he wanted to see one bill for the corridor, not different ones. And that was last year. And now we have 3 different ones. And if there's some way to deal with that, I mean, the reality is that none of them may pass because the governor's office will want to still stick with, they want to see one solution for the whole corridor. So I just wanted to add that was brought up by Senator Portantino to us, and it came from the governor's office.
Thank you. Just wanted to pose a question to the panel. Is there an advantage or an interest in starting legislation that other cities might join on to? Does anyone have a response? Oda?
Anything that we can do to make common cause would be great. And if we started the ball rolling, that would be an effective form of negotiating through legislation or negotiating with legislation in parallel. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that this is a bill that all of our stakeholders can be happy with moving forward. And if it becomes fractured, if we're allowed to be sort of divided and conquered that way by Caltrans, I just want to reiterate, at the end of the day, we should let the state law work, and no bill is better than a bad bill. So it would just depend upon the deal points and whether the other cities could sign on to them.
Thank you, Odom. Mary?
Odom said exactly what I was about to say. Our opinion truly, and this is from not just the Preservation Foundation, but also the tenant group, Sierra Club, also those who live in neighborhoods with the Caltrans homes, that no bill is better than a bad bill. But we really feel so committed to the city working with Anthony Portantino and working side by side if the bill is going forward, which is not our first choice, to be working to negotiate with Caltrans right now. And we really, really hope that the effort that Christy Lopez and Senator Portantino has put into this, they can also channel that energy into negotiating with Caltrans now.
Great, thank you. Joanne?
Yes, I keep thinking back to about 8.5 years ago at the end of Anthony Portantino's assembly terms at a big meeting that he called that was in our library community room. I think Chris Sutton was at that meeting, Odom Stamps, and I'm not sure who else on this call was, but there was about 25 people there from Pasadena, El Sereno, the whole gambit, and the Secretary of Transportation and the Caltrans director that came down from Sacramento. Anthony negotiated at that before and privately, and then at that meeting. And at the end of the meeting, the secretary turned to the director of Caltrans and said, I want you to sell those houses in 5 years. Everybody got along. Nobody was arguing. It was very collaborative. And had it not been for the fact that Anthony Portantino was then not in office to sort of bird dog this, we would have had the houses sold. So I keep looking to that and going back to that meeting and that model as to what we need to do now, because he's in a Senator Portantino is even in a stronger position than he was then. And I think that the powers that be, the governor's office, the secretary's office, et cetera, would welcome a collaborative agreement or a suggestion of how to have an elegant exit out of this whole mess now that the freeway is dead. And Anthony Portantino is the one to organize that and negotiate it. And legislation is speculative, highly speculative. And I don't think that's the way to go, because you don't know what you're going to end up with in 5 months when it goes to the governor's desk, or that he'll even sign it.
Thank you, Joanne. I appreciate. Unless someone else has some additional points to add about this one, we can go ahead and share the notes that staff has been taking. Certainly heard the message of no bill is better than a bad bill, and that there is some opportunity to negotiate outside of legislation. I know that we do have both Christy and Holly Watley available later on if we want to have legal questions as well. But I think maybe we'll hold that and just make sure that we get your input on these different points before we talk about sort of legislation or no legislation, or what it might be able to do. So here, I believe that Margaret is sharing her screen. We've got the topics, key ideas and concepts. Yeah, we hear you that there's a non-legislative solution that you're putting forward, and I believe that some of the next proposals might be related to that, or they might be related to, if there is a legislative solution, what might you want to see in that bill. So, you know, in an effort to get all of the topics on the table for discussion, I think we can probably go on to the next, and then, you know, towards the end, we can start looking at areas where we might have some consensus between the different proposals that are on the table. Is there anyone that wants to make a comment about notes that they see here on the screen before we move on? I don't see anyone. So, Margaret, will you stop sharing your screen? Thank you. And we can go on to, let's see, the next topic I had up on my screen. Let me see if I can find it again. Here we go. The next topic is guarantee all current tenants, residential, nonprofit, commercial, and absolute priority to purchase their property. Who would like to kick off that discussion? Timothy Iveson?
Yeah, I just want to highlight the, I don't know what you'd call it, the subtext of that statement, which is that it's very important to tenants that there are no evictions or displacements. So the absolute right is a guarantee that the tenant gets to choose and not Caltrans. And we can, you know, we can speak more about Caltrans and their management practices, but in principle, I think that's how it should be understood. No evictions.
Thank you. Chris Sutton, you have your hand up?
Yes, the reason for this is because the concept of, quote, tenant in good standing has been repeatedly manipulated by Caltrans by imposing huge, bogus, fake debts going back years, has told people that either their political activity, or if they had a family member stay with them, or any other bizarre technical reason, Caltrans could initiate eviction proceedings. And for a lot of people, those people who are still, again, through the intercession of Senator Portantino, are able to stay in the house, Caltrans still treats them as not in good standing because they were once threatened or went through a partial eviction. And that's why this is important. In addition, the Caltrans staff, particularly the new person who's come in as apparently they're going to be the District 7 property manager, has a stated hostility, not just to the tenants, but to the city of South Pasadena, so that the decision makers in Caltrans, for whatever reason, whether it's because they're a dying agency or because they blame the city for killing the freeway, that the staff in Caltrans have a personal agenda separate from the needs of the state as a whole or the cities or the tenants. And it appears as the tenant's attorney that the Caltrans staff has a tendency to undermine what is the goal of the legislators and the governor's appointee who's head of Caltrans. That there's been this underlying game of sabotage that the Caltrans staff has engaged in since the early 1980s when I first became involved, so that we need to have an absolute right to purchase. And just recently, just last month, Caltrans sent out these letters to the 22 or so market level tenants within South Pasadena telling you've got to come up with financing by April 19th. Now, apparently under Senator Portantino's influence, they've extended that deadline to the end of May. But if the market tenants don't come up with the financing by that date, their right to purchase at market is eliminated. So that the Caltrans staff, and we believe that those letters were sent as a method to undermine the goals of SB 381. You've got the Caltrans staff acting hostile to the interest of the elected officials governing these cities. And that's what we want to have this guaranteed right to purchase, because without it, the tenants are at the mercy of a manipulated, quote, good standing. That's all.
Thank you, Chris. Adam?
Does this point require legislation?
No, it would not if there was an agreement reached between Caltrans and the cities, or the Caltrans and the tenant organization, and that we got that approved by the CTC. Or we're also now proposing that the CTC adopt its own policy of how they will handle the sales when the deeds are proposed to the CTC by Caltrans at some point in the future. So we're hoping that at the May or June CTC meeting, they will adopt a CTC policy regarding the properties in these 3 zip codes and say, you know, we're not gonna consider or pass any of these deeds unless you do these things, which include the tenant's rights and the city's rights of absolute power over the process. Because if you look at the 626 sale, you have a Caltrans bureaucrat completely undermining the Liberty Law to go against South Pasadena in a way that is not factually justified. It is, you know, and they're allowing an inferior application without any real money for rehab to go ahead of South Pasadena's sponsored application. So that we really think this can be done without legislation. It could be done by the CTC alone. It could be done by an agreement or 3 agreements with each of the 3 cities that the legislative delegation could simply tell Caltrans to sign. And I think Caltrans would follow clear direction from the legislators.
Thank you, Chris. I see Christy Lopez has her hand up.
Hi, I just wanted to clarify that I'm taking notes and we'll take them back to the senator for all of the points that will be addressed throughout this meeting this afternoon. I wanted to just also state in regards to negotiating with Caltrans for a non-legislative solution. I have to research that myself and speak to the CTC and speak to Caltrans and see if that might be a viable option. But I will also state that it is my hard belief that Caltrans must follow current regulations and current statutes with regards to the dispensation of these homes. And I believe there was a comment made also earlier that, I'm sorry, let me backtrack. I believe that Caltrans has to follow current statute and current regulations. And there was a comment about it, you know, that the legislation and statute is a much larger universe. And I think and believe that with it as it applies to the government code that governs the dispensation of the sales, we're kind of operating within the space of those regulations. And these are special sales, and this is a special circumstance. And so I would have to further research to see if there is a non-legislative solution, but have been told by Caltrans on multiple occasions that they have to follow current regs and current regulations and current statute with the dispensation of the sales. And so I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you, Christy. I'm going to go in order because we have several people with their hands up. Odom has had his hand up. We're going to go Odom, Holly, Chris, and Joanne. I believe that's the
Yes,
order.
actually, Chris Sutton spoke exactly to what point I was going to make about the non-legislative solution. But I wanted to also add, by way of bolstering this argument, that I have been a liaison when I was an elected official to then Assembly Member Carol Liu's task force that dealt with the Caltrans tenants, and also after she became state senator. So for a very long time, we're aware of abusive activities by Caltrans that sought to evict a number of tenants, often over political issues, including people who were active like Don Jones and others that lost the ability to stay in their house. They were always looking for reasons to kick out people who found issues and let us know about code violations, or did repairs because there was the roof was practically falling down on them. And we took this information in and got really not very far with Caltrans, even though it even continued on during Anthony Portantino's time in the assembly. So it's really coming to fruition now, and I appreciate how long people have been at it, including the time of 2 assembly members and 2 state senators to get a resolution with this. But Caltrans, governors come, governors go. Caltrans is still around and often repeat the same mistakes that they have been taken to court over. And I would just remind our city manager that Gay Forbes also put together, and what I thought of at the time was an excellent HRE that represented our city, and Caltrans used yet another opportunity to essentially rebuke us and say that we did not follow the rules, when I know very well that Gay Forbes did an excellent job putting that together and followed the rules.
Thank you, Odom. I'm going to go to Holly next.
Yes, I just wanted to echo what Ms. Lopez commented on in terms of the applicable statutes that we have here, just to provide some legal context. And that in fact, the Roberti Act, as a very specific statute dealing with these properties, is the one that is currently controlling. And while there may be some general property dispensing with property, other statutes, generally speaking, the specific legal statute will control over the general. So if we're looking at the specific Roberti Act issue, and that is going to control over some of the other ones. And I hear what Mr. Sutton said about, for example, Streets and Highway Code 116. That one does allow Caltrans to delegate some authority to a city, but it's at Caltrans's option to delegate it, and then Caltrans can also withdraw the delegation. So even if you're able to persuade Caltrans to delegate that, they could take it back. And I hear and agree with actually Mr. Sutton's characterization of how we saw the 626 prospect issues sort of unfold, and the application of, or I would argue, misapplication of the Roberti Act as it applied to the city's proposal, which is why, you know, just from sort of the city attorney's perspective, and that not having legislation creates a significant risk of that just repeating itself.
So before I go on to Chris and then Joanne about this point, I just want to, I hear that we're still talking a little bit about ledge or no ledge. I do want to see if we are all in agreement that we have the interest to guarantee all current tenants, residential, nonprofit, commercial, an absolute priority to purchase their property. So is that some agreement that is across the board? If anyone has anything that they want to say about that particular point? And Holly, you still have your hand raised. I don't know if you mean to have that. Okay, so before we go on to the third point, I want to give Chris and Joanne another moment to add to what they had said before.
Yeah, so the question is, what happened in the late 1970s and 1980s when the 2 freeway through Echo Park and Silver Lake and Mid-Wilshire through David Roberti's district, it was canceled? What happened? And what happened was that Senator Roberti got exactly what he wanted from every sale because he told Caltrans what he wanted and they followed it. 5 co-ops were allowed to buy 292 separate units. The individual tenants were able to buy their houses, and everything went because it was being shepherded through by David Roberti. And the Caltrans staff are like most bullies. Once they come up against an authority who calls them on their activities, they will back down. And again, the Roberti law was intended to govern the surplus residential properties. These questions regarding the vacant lots, the gardens, the nonprofits, the schools, the businesses that are in Caltrans properties, it's unclear whether the intention of the Roberti law is to govern them or whether they come under 118 and 118.5 and the other sections. So that the idea that there is no overlap or no ambiguity, and I believe there is in the generic sections of state law, and that the cities have the right to argue and step up and take that authority. In addition, in the Roberti law, at the very end, I can pull it up, but there is a validation section. And what that means is that any sale that goes through and the deed is recorded, it's beyond dispute. It is beyond legal action. It is validated so that to the extent that we want to be creative, do the double escrow like on Berkshire back in 2001, do something else involving the city, and the sale goes through, it's going to go through. There's nobody standing on the side saying, oh, we're going to sue you if you do something slightly wrong. Who stands to benefit if the sales go rapidly and in a flexible manner? No one is out there attacking us. There's nobody. All of the challenges to the sales in the past have been brought by the city of South Pasadena, by the neighborhood groups who I've also represented, or by the tenants themselves. We don't have Alhambra or Rosemead or someone out there saying, we're going to have to build this freeway. We're not going to let you sell these properties. The freeway is dead to the intervention and wisdom of Senator Portantino, who ran on that when he first ran for the assembly in 2006. So that my view is that if the legislative delegation steps up, we can get exactly what we want from the director of Caltrans, from the CTC, and at the lower level, sabotage on Caltrans staff will end if we get that discipline involved. That's all.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. So in an effort to manage the time, it's clear that there's some more discussion about the legislative versus non-legislative option. I do want to get through at least the points that were raised here, so we can go through and talk about those points, and then we can, once we've gotten everyone's input, maybe we can then revisit this conversation. I see Joanne put her hand down, so I'd like to actually have have Margaret go ahead and share her screen again. We can put up on the screen points that were made regarding the second point of guarantee for all current tenants, and then we can move on to the third item. Okay. So I think that, let's see, important to have no evictions, ongoing issues with Caltrans utilizing the term tenant in good standing, that was raised, again, we can talk about this later on as a no legislative option, but obviously that's one of the issues that we want to address is the in good standing. And reinforce what is already in the Roberti Act. Let's see. Does anyone have any comments that they want to add based on what you see on the notes here about this, the second item for discussion? No, okay, Joanne?
Yeah, just one quick thing. I was at the public hearings, as was Chris and a lot of the tenants, for the new regulations, which were forced by the city's lawsuit. In all of these discussions and everything that's going on since then, the problem has been, as I see it, Caltrans' interpretation of the new regulations. And there's not been a way to, other than to have a discussion of alternative interpretations. We just sort of, everybody's been going along with what they interpret it to be, which I think most of us feel is the wrong interpretation in some cases. So I want to just put that on the table. It's an incorrect interpretation on their point, not that the law or the regulations are the problem.
Thank you. I appreciate that point. So let's go on to the third item. I'll read that now. The third proposed either discussion topic or amendment is require signed agreements delivered to the CTC for every sale, detailing either waiver or enforcement of absolute priority to purchase, whether that right is held by the city, the existing tenant, or a nonprofit. Does anyone have anything to say to start off that item? We have consensus around that item? Oh, everyone's right, yep. Okay, so we haven't heard from Charles yet, so let's go to Charles first and then to Chris. Oh, Charles, you're on mute.
I hate Zoom. Margaret, welcome back. I just want to say that having the right to purchase, especially for residential tenants, does not mean that they will have the means to purchase. So we just have to be clear that, almost every entity that was on that list, residential tenants, nonprofits, and commercial tenants, will need financing. So just, there's a whole other thing behind that policy, which is how do we get everybody to the finish line?
Thank you, Charles. Chris?
Yes, and this could be adopted as a CTC policy governing their own actions, meaning if you bring us a deed, if Caltrans brings a deed to the CTC that doesn't comply with these kind of requirements, the CT can simply, in their unlimited discretion, say no. We will not authorize a deed to any property that hasn't gone through this process. So that, and that's the reason why we want to have that clearly stated, that there has to be a written waiver if someone's giving up their rights. And as to Charles' comment, it's true that that financing may be difficult, but California Housing Finance Agency has told the tenants who are purchasing on an affordable basis that they're going to provide 100% financing for those tenants. And then the equity that is retained by either the state or by someone, that reduces the nominal purchase price up front for those tenants. And then the question regarding the tenants who are buying at market, so far, Caltrans has failed to provide the cost of repairs, which are supposed to be deducted from the so-called market price. So we don't yet know whether or not the correct price is going to be out of the reach of anyone. So that's to be seen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Charles, do you need to have your?
I don't want to dive too deep into this, but it's really the story that Chris told about giving tenants like 30 days to get a mortgage. So as long as the probability of everyone qualifying for financing increases, the longer time they have to prepare for the purchase. So, period.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add about this topic? If not, I'll have Margaret share her screen again. This is about the require the signed agreements delivered to the CTC. So the point about the difference between the right to purchase and ability to purchase financing, does that belong in this topic, or is that really the guarantee all current tenants? Is that the second point? Maybe it doesn't matter at this point. Okay, so if anyone does not have any comments on the notes that we've taken, we will move on to the fourth item, which is to cancel all illicit debts, penalties, and disputes alleged by Caltrans right-of-way records. All tenants should be granted good standing. Does anyone want to start off with adding to the discussion about that? Chris?
So you have to know the history. So between like 1965 and 2002, when repairs were needed on the properties, whether it was residential or nonprofit or businesses, Caltrans would tell the tenant, you make the repairs yourself, and then give us the receipt and we'll take it off your rent. And that was done in order to comply with the 1973 and 1979 injunctions, which required the properties to be maintained and occupied. After Caltrans convinced Judge Pregerson in 1999 to not mandate the properties be occupied, saying, oh, we have no economic incentive to vacate them, which was of course not true. Immediately after that, the Caltrans staff said, oh, you can't make the repairs yourself. And if you do, you'll be evicted. And Caltrans started raising the rents. In 2001 or 2002, the District 7 director at the time testified at the CTC that said, because District 7 does not receive any of the rents, they all go into Caltrans in Sacramento to the State Highway Fund. From the perspective of District 7, I just would soon have all the properties be vacant and fenced off and boarded up until we can build the freeway, because it would provide less management costs to District 7. He then put in charge of the management a new person, who I'm not going to name, but who between 2002 and 2012 engaged in a series of abusive tactics to force people out, increasing the amount of vacancies dramatically, and apparently, though we don't really know for sure, taking money or other things under the table. Caltrans forced that person out in 2012, but continued to maintain the practice of barring tenants from making repairs, so that the repairs weren't getting made, and then Caltrans would say, oh, this property is in such bad condition, we can't rent it, right? So that the illicit debt has come about in the last 3 or 4 years, where Caltrans would go back into their files and say, oh my God, you didn't pay rent in 2008. So you owe us that rent plus 12 years of late charges. You owe us $20,000. And these have been sent out to numerous tenants. And the reason that happened was because the person who they forced out to cover their tracks went into the Caltrans ledgers and zeroed out and erased documents and threw things away, physically threw them in the trash can to get rid of record keeping. And so that Caltrans doesn't know who paid rent and who didn't pay rent during that 10-year period of time. And so that they used that lack of information to assume no rent. They initiated evictions and a lot of settlements. And I would advise the lawyers for those tenants, go out and serve a subpoena to appear at court for that person who's now left Caltrans. And as soon as they would do that, Caltrans would settle and give up their claims for these illicit debts. No private landlord can go back and claim 10 or 12 years of debts where there was no bill sent and nobody knew anything about this. So this is here because of misconduct by the Caltrans staff and because the current Caltrans staff is using that past misconduct as an excuse to penalize the current tenants. That's why this is here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Certainly a problem that we want to address. Adam, do you have something to add to that?
Sure. We all agree that all the tenants have absolute priority in something we're initiating to be able to qualify to purchase the property. This language adds that every tenant, no matter what their circumstances to get there, whether they were at fault or Caltrans was at fault, would cancel debts, penalties, disputes. I just have concern where we say all tenants, and we don't understand the particular situation of each tenant's responsibility of that situation. Are we sure that all tenants should have all their debts, penalties, and disputes canceled, or were some of those legitimately the cause of the tenant?
Thank you, Adam. So does anyone else have anything new to add to that conversation? Otherwise, we'll have Margaret share her notes for this item, and then we can move on to the next. So Caltrans previously asked tenants to complete repairs on their own. It seems to be a system that worked. However, that system changed, and appreciate the history on that change. Something what is that is left, a remnant of that is perhaps an inability to claim, costs for a tenant that really should be a Caltrans cost. I see that Tim Iverson has his hand up. Timothy?
Yeah, I just think, I mean, I don't have a direct answer for the previous question, but I think, sorry, I've kind of completely forgotten what I think. I think that it's worth entertaining this policy point, because as Chris has outlined, you would be taking Caltrans' word over the word of the tenant. And I think that, given the history and our experience, that is an extremely problematic position to take, because they have, even in the last few months, actively sought to evict tenants on pretenses. And I think it's worth considering I mean, this is really a sticking point, because it involves not a kind of financial transaction, but an issue of justice. And I think that at least resetting the ledger is a worthy gesture. And if tenants later, right, under city control or under HRE control, or at some point demonstrate behavior that becomes problematic, that's one thing. But I think that it would dramatically increase people's faith, tenants' faith in this process, if they saw some form of justice. I mean, you might even think of this process as a kind of alternative to a consent decree, right? Or an alternative to the next 5 lawsuits, right? And that, I mean, this is also something that's been acknowledged by other people. It's not just Caltrans tenants in the 710 corridor. Legislators in Orange County have made public statements to this effect regarding Caltrans record keeping. Tenants in Hayward, California came up against some of the same issues. I mean, this is a widespread systemic problem. And so, I mean, this is one of the reasons I think tenants are kind of pushing really hard with these points, is that we want to see someone stand up for the tenants and not get bogged down with this idea of, oh, there might be some bad tenants, right? Caltrans's transgressions far overshadow and outweigh any bad tenant. That would be my perspective.
Thank you, Timothy. Joanne?
Yes, I'm thinking back to when I was at one of the public hearings for the new regulations with Chris and the tenants and Margaret, et cetera. All the tenants were getting up, telling their stories to the panel, which had a couple of Caltrans attorneys, and I forgot who else at the front of the room. And after like a couple of public hearings of this, I'm sitting there thinking there's 460 properties in the corridor. And there's probably 460 different stories about the experiences, and that's all going to have to be dealt with. So I think the approach would be, if we get to this point, is to have some sort of an I don't know if an overseer or a mediator or some sort of panel that looks at all the issues and figures out a fair and equitable way to move forward with the sale. And of course, they would know about all these transgressions of Caltrans. And then, but I think it's something to be discussed, and it's something that could be worked out fairly rather than just sort of automatically thinking that maybe some of the tenants were the problem. And I've known a lot of the tenants over the years, and I can guarantee you if there's a tenant problem, it may be 1%. So that's all my thought.
Thank you, Joanne, for that. This is obviously an important issue in the history of the mismanagement, I guess, of the properties that we certainly need to take into consideration, and fairness as well as we go forward. So appreciate that history and that insight. If others don't mind, I'm going to move on to the next item for discussion. And that is to guarantee affordable housing and shared equity mortgage assistance to all Caltrans tenants. Would someone like to kick off that discussion? Chris.
So under the traditional model of affordable housing, the government either buys land or arranges for something, and there's a subsidy up front to either the developer or through the tenant, and then there's this long-term covenant to maintain the affordability. And that's not the case here. And that's why I think some of the traditional models may not apply. What we have here is that Caltrans purchased these properties beginning in the early 1960s up through the last one, I think, was in 1997, and that Caltrans has been receiving rent on these properties for decades, hundreds of millions of dollars. And they keep saying, we need to get our investment back. They've gotten their investment back times 10. And so that the idea that, and the goal today of the Roberti Law, as we see it, is to preserve communities. And so that the idea that anyone who buys on an affordable basis, or even buys at some above affordable basis, is being subsidized is simply false, because the shared equity means if the property is worth $500,000 or $1 million and the tenant is paying $200,000, the rest of the equity is held by the government, either Cal HFA or the cities or someone. And then when the property resells, that equity then goes into an affordable housing fund, so that the tenant doesn't receive full ownership of the property. In effect, there's this silent second. So that model, I think, is equally applicable to people who are above 150% of median. So that what we have here is people whose incomes are slightly higher than moderate, slightly higher than middle, which is the 150% of median, then have to pay market value for the property. And if there's repairs, have to do the repairs, pay the taxes, etc. So there should be a way to preserve the communities by allowing all tenants, even the nonprofits, for example, and to buy at a certain rate to preserve the community. And then the government holds back most of the equity, regardless of the income of the tenants. And that's what this is about. And so the tenants are there as part of the community. And so we're proposing that all the tenants have the right to purchase at some less than market value. And the government, whether it's Cal HFA or the city or someone, holds back the rest of the equity until the property resells in the future. Use the model that exists under the Carol Liu amendments to do the shared equity and not limit the purchasers. Because what's happened in Los Angeles in the last 20 years is that the real estate industry, the real estate prices have gone crazy. And so that you can't expect someone who has a normal income, not low, not middle, but even upper middle income, to be able to afford to buy a house. You know, my daughter and her husband are both full-time employees. They're both making in excess of 6 figures. They can't afford to buy a house in this neighborhood, you know? And the only reason I have the house I'm in is that my mother's estate provided me a way to buy it at less, and my siblings agreed to take back paper, or I wouldn't have been able to afford the house I grew up in. So that the
Chris, can
idea
I-
that, and so we want to have this idea of the shared equity be spread out to everyone.
So may I ask a clarifying question? Are you talking about if there's an existing tenant who is non-income qualifying, that they have some ability to apply equity that essentially came from paying rent over a period of time?
Well, that's the general, I don't know what you would call it, the general fairness concept. Exactly
Okay.
right, because people have been paying rent for decades. Up until 2002, the tenants were making the repairs, you know, and so that whether it's, you know, whether it's someone in South Pasadena home, or whether it's Sequoia School, or whether it's a community garden, they shouldn't be facing these burdens of buying the property and be competing with real estate developers because of the strange, obtuse nature of our current market that has made it very hard for even employed people to buy housing. I mean, it's
Okay.
just.
Great, I appreciate that clarification. I want to go to Odom and then to Charles, who both have had their hands up.
And again, I just wanted to make it clear what a poor landlord Caltrans has been. There are houses literally that are about to fall in on themselves, including one adjacent to my property. And what exactly is the market value of a house that is a historic house in nature, but has been allowed to essentially be demolished by neglect over time? It may be less than the value of the property practically if you did the correct job under the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic structures to restore it. And yet at the same time, I don't think that Caltrans should be let off the hook from this, because they take money from the federal government, and that is a federal standard. So that's so important in these negotiations, that Caltrans either sell these properties at a rate, at a discount rate that people can fix them up, or they should be made to fix them up and then only then allowed to sell them when they've been brought up to neighborhood, and more important than community standards, Secretary of the Interior standards for historic structures, because they made them in this shape with their neglect over these decades.
Thank you. Let's hear from Charles. Oh, you're on mute, Charles. Sorry.
Thank you.
Darn Zoom.
I really seconding what Odom and to some extent Chris said. When we were doing our work for South Pasadena a couple of years ago, we ran into over-income tenants. Some people were over-income by 5%. Some people were over-income by 500%. So market has still be affordable, quote unquote, based on income. And then just to reiterate what Odom said, we found a lot of tenants over income and otherwise, they income qualified, where they had not reported problems with their units, because if they reported a problem with their units, they may have been at risk of being evicted. So I don't think Caltrans's appraisals necessarily reflected the condition of these units. So I would say affordable, taking into account income regardless of whether you're income qualified or over income, and taking into account the actual condition of the property.
Thank you, Charles. So Chris, if you have something new to add, I also want to have Adam, who has his hand up.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize something I said, which is in 1999, when the city and the Sierra Club and the National Trust had Caltrans in federal court in front of Judge Pregerson on this issue of the nature of the injunction and whether or not Caltrans would be ordered to keep the properties occupied. Either willfully or negligently, the lawyers misled Judge Pregerson. And the reason these properties are empty today and have not been kept up is because Caltrans staff said, oh, look, the 1973, 1979 injunction says keep them occupied. But look, the 1999 injunction says, oh, we don't have to keep them occupied. And so that what's happened since then is they essentially have gone and taken advantage of misleading a federal judge and allowed the properties to decay, including the ones that are occupied. And they just, I think it's rewarding Caltrans misconduct is terrible by forcing people to pay a huge amount of money when in fact they've been expecting to buy the properties. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam.
I wonder if this bullet point is more about properly pricing the home versus how we define what the price is. Meaning that if we define that the repairs to the property have to be credited in the purchase price, then we see a substantial reduction in what the buyer ends up paying. In SB 381, what we've so far talked about and contemplated was if it's a historic home, whether it's local, state, or federal, that the South Pasadena preservation guidelines would apply. And that's a big change from what Caltrans would be using as a measure of what the repairs necessary are in the home. You take a home that does have that criteria, and we could see that the buyer, the current tenant, would end up paying much less than what the fair market value is, all repaired. But I think it's problematic, perhaps, that we use any language that says that the pricing should be at an affordable housing level, regardless of income, because we have some tenants that have substantial income and some that don't. And using any term of affordable housing for somebody that is far above affordable housing criteria may be problematic. And I think we may be solving the same thing by talking about how does Caltrans take in consideration all the repairs.
Thank you, Adam. So Chris, if you have a new point to address that, and then we can go on to Joanne and then the next item.
Yes. So what Caltrans is doing with those 22 market tenants who are on the first list and who's gotten those letters, they're telling a number of them, we treat your house as a complete tear down and uninhabitable. And therefore, we're going to analyze the property as land only and as an investment piece of land. And therefore, the idea that we're going to deduct any cost of repairs is we're not going to even consider that, because we value the house as a negative, and therefore we're not going to treat the house as repairable at all. So that drives the land, because they're saying, well, this could be 2 or 3 units of market rate housing at $3 million a piece. So you owe us $1 million for land value, and your house, even though we've let it decay, cannot be considered. The repairs will not even be part of the equation. So that the problem here is again, the Caltrans staff has taken the so-called as-is purchase price and turned it on its head by saying, we're not even going to include that because the house is so bad, we don't let you include the cost of repairs.
So it sounds like there's some ability to include in the language that regarding the determination of the state of the property and taking into consideration the owner of the property over the last many years regarding the state of that property. So I hear you. We certainly are going to make note of that. I'm going to go to Joanne next and then to Timothy again.
Well, I want to talk about specifically, and there's other conversations we need to have within this to further refine it, but I just had a conversation about vacant historic houses in South Pasadena with the Caltrans Historic Preservation Officer last week. And as I've talked to Charles about this, and I think Mark and others, and last 8 years ago with the Secretary of Transportation and Caltrans director, when they came down after the big meeting that Portantino called, they came down a few weeks later to tour some of these houses. And one big one in Pasadena that's still vacant after 8 years, and it was fixed up and they couldn't lease. But the idea that the best idea to solve the problem is to sell all of the historic houses at market rate and require, of course, the buyer to deduct the improvements to rehab the house. And then that money should be put back into an affordable sales program for the other houses in the corridor. Now, I proposed this idea to District 7 Director Belinsky about a year and a half ago, and that we all need to sit down and discuss all of this. But as Chris has said before, if you have Caltrans, the tenants, the cities, the preservation groups, all sitting down and coming to an agreement, there isn't anybody to sue anybody, and you can work things out. But that is a proposal I'd like to put on the table for the vacant houses, and in particular, the historic houses, that they be sold at market rate, less repairs, and then that money be put into an affordable sales program for the other 710 corridor houses.
Thank you, Joanne. Timothy?
Yeah, you might also want to consider specifying that the cities do their own appraisals, because speaking to Chris's comments about, the as-is condition being kind of flipped on its head, they do tend to evaluate the condition of the homes in a way that suits them for the present argument, right? So in El Sereno, all of the vacant homes, which were being kept vacant during a housing crisis, were deemed to be uninhabitable, completely condemned, absolutely unfit for human occupation. And when they were actually entered, it turned out that that wasn't necessarily the case. The house in front of me, I mean, my neighbor died 2 years ago, and his house was absolutely inhabitable and rentable at the time in which they vacated the property. But since then, because it's been left vacant, it's deteriorates a little more every month. But the idea that the houses are totaled, I don't trust them when they say that a repair is good or fine, and I don't trust them when they say that the property is completely unfixable. I think that they're just taking a position that suits their needs at the time, and thus, I mean, they do. I think I've seen one of the sales agreements, and they do have accredited appraisers, but I think a second opinion would be advisable.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that, from the heads nodding, and as well, just from the work that we've been doing with the subcommittee, I think that there's definite consensus around that, around, the city doing its own appraisal and investigations, and as well as, the formula by which to determine a price for a house. So I think that we have some consensus on that item. And I just want to remind everyone, we're about halfway through our meeting time, and we are halfway through our questions, which would not leave any time for any of the Q&A at the end. But I just wanted to, this is your forum, so I want to just remind you of that. And quickly, maybe I'll have Margaret share her screen, and then we can go on to the 6th item. So the last item we talk about here in blue, take a look at these bullet points. If you have any comments or you want to add, I see that Joanne has her hand up. Maybe Joanne, you want to go ahead and add something while we're still on this item?
Yes, I think the example of the situation with the appraisal of the Garfield lot 508 Meridian needs to be considered in this, because there was a little glitch actually caused by the city, somebody in the planning department who's still not there, that and then we were asked for and were granted a reappraisal, which significantly changed the price of the house, or the lot, excuse me, that's now, and that sale has closed escrow and is final. But I think that needs to be added there, the Garfield lot sale looked at in this discussion of appraisals.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that, Joanne. Okay, I'll have Margaret stop sharing her screen, and we'll go on to the next question, the next item for discussion, which is prioritize the creation of cooperatives and land trusts for housing, open space, and gardens. Would anyone like to start that discussion? Charles.
Well, probably a lot of you have heard me on the subject of limited equity co-ops, but I think that that's less than optimal form of common interest development. So without getting into the weeds, I think if I'm understanding the purpose of that point, I would say co-ops or other form of common interest development per the law in California that governs common interest developments. VA won't lend on co-ops. FHA won't lend on co-ops. Fannie Mae reluctantly lends on co-ops. The State Department of Real Estate does not like to regulate co-ops. I know they exist. I know the stories about the El Sereno. I mean the co-ops along Route 2, but they are a much less preferable form of common interest development than just your good old-fashioned condominium regime.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add about open space or gardens? Anything in particular about this item? Chris?
Yeah, as to the gardens and the nonprofits, there are provisions in the generic streets and highways code sections that when there is a public purpose associated with the sale, and some of this is also reflected in the amendments that Senator Portantino got through to the Roberti law in the fall of 2019 in SB 7, is that the price that the gardens and the other nonprofits pay should not be based upon the ultimate investment value of the property. If they make a permanent commitment to use it as a garden or a park or a historic resource or a public benefit nonprofit corporation, that the price they pay should be based upon what the property is being used as, not on what the property could be in an open market. So that part of the idea here and part of our concern with the Durazo bill, both the one last year and the one this year, it's ambiguous on what the impact is on the community gardens, because those are not necessarily improved properties. And so under the mandate that they be developed as housing, you're going to lose the 4 gardens in Pasadena, the 2 gardens in El Sereno, and the 1 garden in South Pasadena. And that the people who are, preserving those gardens, a lot of volunteer work, they need to have some kind of a recognized priority. That's all. That's what I would say here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I know that I believe everyone agrees on the point of those uses. I don't know who raised their hand first, so I'll go with Joanne and then to Charles. Oh, and I see Christy as well. It's got her hand raised. Joanne.
Hi, I just got a bit of information the other day pertaining to the garden, the community garden on Magnolia and the Holden bill. So I was asked, does the city have a lease on that? Which I assume they do with Caltrans for that, the Magnolia garden. I believe Assemblymember Holden, they've been asked to amend their bill so that to take out, to exclude any lot that is leased. And I think it was mainly for Arlington Gardens and the issues pertaining to that. So and I said I was pretty sure it did because I brought that up to their office, and I think they're working on an amendment that would exclude those lots that are leased.
Thank you, Joanne. We go to Christy.
Just to clarify, I don't believe that SB 51 affects Pasadena or South Pasadena. So to the comments that were made earlier that Arlington Gardens and some of those sales that are for non-residential and for nonprofit sales, which is true that SB 7 ensured that nonprofits would be able to purchase at value in use as opposed to the highest use of the property. I don't believe that SB 51 affects either South Pasadena or Pasadena with regards to nonprofit sales. It is also my belief, I do not believe that Los Angeles or Alhambra has any nonprofit tenants. I believe they do have some non-residential commercial, properties. But I just wanted to clarify that I do not believe that SB 51 impacts at all South Pasadena or Pasadena's properties at all.
Thank you, Christy. Chris, do you have anything to add before we move to the next item?
Well, my response earlier, a little bit confused. The bill last summer, SB 9, at the end would have affected all 3 cities, and the bill then didn't get out. There are 2 gardens in El Sereno. One is a community garden, which I'm assuming has a lease with Caltrans. The other one is kind of treated as a public park. And I believe the city of LA has a lease, and that some nonprofit, in fact, helps maintain that park. Councilmember De Leon has talked about expanding that park onto the vacant Caltrans land that's adjacent to that park and I think adjacent to the community garden. And the problem that we have in that is that you have a council member who's proposing expanding the community gardens, and yet the Durazo bill in terms of El Sereno would treat the vacant land as priority for development for housing. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll have Margaret share her screen again to make sure that everyone has their ideas registered here before we move on. Take a look. See if I don't see any hands, we'll move on to the next item. Thank you, Margaret. So our, looks like 6th item for discussion, require the creation of a community land trust as the city approved nonprofit housing related entity, or HRE. Who would like to start that discussion? Joanne.
I'm just going to comment related to the private HRE Esperanza that has, I think they own 10 properties in town. And that's been a totally unsatisfactory relationship. It's unfortunate that they were allowed to buy those houses. I've heard complaints from residents in the neighborhood, North Corridor, basically, that the Caltrans houses are in better shape than the Esperanza houses. So I am against any form of outside HRE doing anything in the city. And I think it should be a total city controlled and established a land trust, or and use the existing your existing laws or whatever related to the housing entity that the city is, the public housing entity.
Do I see some heads nodding? I know that that's agreed in the proposal that the subcommittee is already talking about. Are there other agreement? Is this an item of agreement between everyone? I think so. I think we can, Margaret, you want to share your screen and we can move on to the next item after we make sure the notes are correct. I think just add the priority for, local oversight. Does that work for everyone? Oh, we have a hand up from Odom and Adam. Odom, you go first.
Yes, I just would like to comment about changing state laws, and again, going back to Caltrans, essentially demolition by neglect, that Caltrans in effect not be allowed to take advantage, nor would I hope our city at HRE would take advantage of the fact that these houses are in such bad condition that one could make an argument that that would be easier to be torn down, except for the fact that it's like, to make an analogy to the Menendez trial, looking for the Menendez orphans to be given leniency. I don't see how Caltrans should be let off the hook to allow these houses to be torn down and to have them rezoned and under state law to allow bonuses and incentives to create apartment buildings that would be rented in perpetuity or for 55 years, when they should be brought back to Secretary of the Interior standards for historic houses, and that they should be in fact helped through affordable housing laws to be brought back into the private sector, and that these houses then start paying taxes to the city of South Pasadena, which we have been essentially locked out of for the past 50 years on the houses that Caltrans has owned. We have not collected those funds, and we ought to be able to collect funds again in the private sector. Also, that the city should look forward to not in fact being in the housing rental business like Caltrans has done such a poor job, but we should look to our city HRE to be facilitators, to put them in the hands of people who will take pride and keep their houses to community standards rather than rent them out with little control or interest in keeping the properties up. So this is really about the neighborhood concerns that these houses not continue to molder, or that they be torn down and turned into apartment buildings under current or future anticipated state law that allow bonuses for apartment buildings to be put up, even in what we think of as single family residential neighborhoods, which are already triplex allowed if you count an ADU and a junior ADU in addition to the house itself.
Thank you, Odom. Adam?
I've been taught never speak when there's consensus, but I just wanted to say that on a community, I've been involved in forming several community land trusts, and it gives the community the opportunity to have local control on the board, and it gives the ability for that community land trust to hire a responsive and experienced property management company to be able to come in and ensure that the community's concerns are addressed. And I say that because we've heard community comments that have come in where people in the community are very concerned about the city taking on all the responsibility of managing and controlling, and they point to deficiencies in the past. But in this case, what this bullet point, and again, the committee agrees with this is 100%, allows us to do is it transfers ownership from the city immediately to a approved community land trust controlled with a board consisting of residents in the community that then hires the experienced and capable company that addresses these issues.
Thank you, Adam. Chris?
I will just say that this is a very complex area, because some tenants are sitting on land that was already subdivided before Caltrans bought it. Some tenants are on land that had 3 or 4 houses on one lot and may need to be cut up in some manner. But I think the goal of this is to provide the cities and the community with the maximum amount of power to regulate what Caltrans does. So there's no wiggling around, that the goal of the Roberti law is community preservation. It's not, it's not speculation. And I think, while I agree in general with this statement, I think when you get down to the actual nitty gritty, there's going to be a lot more complications that really you need to have the cities in control in some manner. And that's why the proposal that the tenants have put forward is giving the cities basically an absolute veto power before any of the sales go to the CTC. And this is kind of a more specific aspect of that, but it's going to take a lot of complicated, the lots in Pasadena, they've taken part of the land off of some of the lots and widened Pasadena Avenue, and that Sequoia School is sitting on some lots and the other part of the lot is down in the trench, so that there's and in South Pasadena, particularly up on the hills, there's a lot of problems where the lines are. And so in general, I think this is a good idea, but I think that we need to have a more generic city control over the process. And that's not on this list, but that's my only comment, is that the cities need a generic veto power over the sales to make sure that there's none of these community disruptions.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I think that it's clear from this discussion and the previous ones that there is an interest in the city having a lot more control over the future of these houses, and yet to be discussed more thoroughly is whether that's a legislative or not option. And we can talk about that when we finish going through the 10, but I see Mark has his hand up. Great to hear from you too.
Thank you, Joanna. I just wanted to piggyback on what Odom was saying. He made reference to a concern about potential density bonuses, and he's absolutely right that state law at present gives every property, residential property, the ability to add an ADU and a junior ADU. And I just wanted to clarify for those that might be watching who live in the neighborhoods where the Caltrans homes are concentrated. Our municipal code limits density bonuses to those properties on which the base zoning would allow a minimum of 5 units or more. So at least my reading as a former city planner is that you couldn't do a density bonus project in a single family zone. That's in no way meant to diminish concerns about the possible addition of ADUs or JADUs, but I just wanted to put that out there as additional information.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification, Mark. I appreciate that. And I know when Odom referred to the triplex, the ability to make a triplex, it essentially saying the single family dwelling, the ADU and the JADU would be 3 units. But the law still sees that as a single family residence and single family property. So thank you. Joanne.
I think the concern comes from that I've heard from some of the neighbors that if there's a house there now and it was sold to a buyer who would fix it up, that buyer would have the discretion to, as Odom said, make it a triplex or add an ADU and a junior ADU. The concern comes from if the city owned it as per 381, that then the city would absolutely max it out to that extent if there was a demolition. So that's why I think we put in, I think in one of the other points, that we were not in favor of demolition. So if it's a private owner, it's discretionary and they may not do it. But if it was a public owner like the city would absolutely do it, trying to satisfy the RENA numbers or whatever. That is the concern that I've heard from the neighbors.
So it's a concern that's not specifically listed here as an objective, but it's embedded in the desire not to demolish. And the reason I ask is because even if you don't demolish a house and you rehabilitate it, that lot still has the ability to have an ADU and a JADU. I mean, legally, there's no difference in which that property is treated.
Right, but if it was a private owner, there's probably less chance of that happening. That if it's a public owner like the city, it would absolutely happen to max out the property.
So is that a different is that a different objective that we want to have, that you want to have registered?
Well, somewhere
I see somebody nodding their head. Is that a?
Yeah, somewhere where it fits in, but I sort of jumped in at, maybe I'm on the wrong bullet point. I'm not really sure.
Okay, so let me, I'm going to call on Mary, and then after Mary, Odom.
It was not specifically listed because there's differing understandings whether the city owned it, that they could take the house, the ADU and the granny unit, take the house down and have 5 or 6.
Yeah, so that's not, yeah.
If that is not allowed, it doesn't need to be addressed, but we do want to make sure that that's qualified so that there is an understanding that this can't happen, so that there'll be no confusion. But we don't need to list it as a point. We just need to make sure that this is qualified and this is our understanding and this won't happen.
Thank you for that. Odom.
Yes, we didn't include it also as a bulletin point because we think it's tangentially related to this issue, but we did include it as part of our preamble to the bullet points. And we were specifically talking about to the extent of state law, because state law does trump local ordinances, as pretty clear, because our city would not allow the use of ADUs, but it's not up to our city. It actually is an as of right because of state law. And there are more state laws like this coming down the pike. And one could argue that if you had a 50% bonus of a triplex, that essentially you could in fact get 1.5 more units, and you round up. So that's 5 units. And you could rejigger the sizes so that you don't have one big house and 2 smaller pieces, but in fact, you had 5 individual roughly equal flats. So that there is concern. It's not a bullet point because the law hasn't changed yet, but we see each time that the assembly meets that every year there's something further going down that path to take more state control to allow more affordable housing. And I'm just trying to make the point that we would like to see the houses, such as they are, restored and returned to the fabric of our community and allowed to be sold under Roberti law, not to be torn down and turned into a series of apartment buildings that would be rented for 55 years that are not connected to the communities that they are in.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that, Odom. Are we, Bianca, I think, did you say something? Okay. Margaret, you want to share your screen and we can make sure we have notes and move on to the next. Okay, so we're on, the topic was city approved nonprofit housing related entity. And so I think really our discussion went a little bit, off into oversight and what we might want to see, through that oversight. But these notes are included here. Does anyone want to raise their hand and add or clarify a point before we move on? Sally, and then Bianca.
I was going to make a statement on the next bullet point, but it seems like it has morphed into both. So would you like me to wait until that next bullet point? Because it's more, I mean,
Sure. Yeah, sure. You'll be the first one we call on. And when I go to that, and just make sure that Bianca, if her point is regarding this one, we'll take that comment first.
Yeah, can we go back to the screen share on the bullet point? I just want clarification with this discussion. It says restrict the ability to tear down historic homes or rezone. And then the bottom, oh wait, did something get taken out, that bottom about, okay, no, now I'm kind of lost here. I understand about no tear downs of historic homes, but what about homes that are not historic and that are very much falling apart? Are we saying then no tear downs for any property?
I think, what we heard is that the city does its own evaluation to understand the condition of the house, the home, and maybe the reasons, and the taking into consideration that the ownership of the property and maybe the neglect of the maintenance might be part of that, especially in negotiating with Caltrans on the price. Certainly heard desire to retain as much of the historic structures as possible. I think there might be at some point, and maybe this is a point that needs further discussion or just study, is what if a property really is too far gone to, I mean, there isn't actually anything to renovate. You could maybe build the same looking house on the same location, but there is an economic consideration about that too. So, and I'm not sure if that's part of your question, Bianca, but it's certainly, it's a question that's sort of raised in my mind based on this discussion. Odom, and then Joanne and Mark.
So I would make 2 points about the historicity of the houses that Caltrans own. They all need a second pass at evaluation, because just the amount of time that Caltrans has owned them has make some of these houses eligible that weren't considered historic at the time that they were bought, but they've owned them for 50 to 60 years. So that's one point I wanted to make. And the second point that I wanted to make was regarding if they're not historic, we're not speaking directly as a preservation foundation to that, but they're in neighborhoods that are either eligible for historic district listing, or some of them are even in actual historic districts. And if as such, they should be also reviewed as contributors to those districts. So just to make a fine point of that.
So maybe the inclusion of some language about historic evaluation and HRE report or something in part of the appraisal.
Yes, and I would
Perhaps,
just
and part of
also
that.
remind everybody that in our cultural heritage ordinance, we actually put in language, very strong language, that if you demolish a historic structure, you're expected and required to build it back stick for stick. Even if it is just a total recreation, that's the penalty you pay for demolishing something without a certificate of appropriateness or allowance or a demolition application. And I think Caltrans should be held to that standard. And just because they've allowed it to molder into the point where many of the character defining features have been degraded or even destroyed, does not mean that they should therefore be, given a pass on this. In fact, more is the reason to make them put it back correctly.
Thank you, Odom. So we'll go to Joanne and then Mark and then Chris.
Well, when we discuss this, no demolitions, I mean, for all the houses. And my husband's and my first attempt at rehabbing houses was in the late 80s. And it was a house that was condemned by the city and told the person that we bought it from, the estate of a lady that had died, that it needed to be torn down. So we purchased it anyway and went to the city. Well, no, we didn't quite. We went to the city first and said, we are intending to rehabilitate this house. Will you, withdraw that demolition order? And they did, and we fixed it up. That's 1400 Indiana Avenue, and anybody can go by and look at it. And then I want to ask Sean Joyce to comment on the state of 2002 Berkshire. That was about as bad as you can get. And that house has been rehabilitated. So it's because of that experience that I'm saying no demolitions, because none of the houses are worse than 2002 Berkshire was. And the city stood up and told Caltrans about 4 or 5 times, no demolition. And then Sean came up with his creative idea to have it restored.
Great credit to Adam and to the late, great Gay Forbes. It looked like something out of Fred Flintstone. You could see Fred hammering on the door trying to get in. It was dirt floor, no question about it.
Thank you. So Mark and then Chris, and I just want to remind everyone, while this is an important conversation that we'll take notes on, it is off topic. So it's important. So I'm glad we're at least getting this down. Mark.
Thank you, Joanna. Just 2 points very quickly to add to what Odom was saying regarding our existing cultural heritage ordinance. It's possible that not everybody knows that the ordinance also contains a provision that any structure 45 years or older, whether it is on the city's inventory of cultural resources or not, cannot be demolished without a finding by the Cultural Heritage Commission that it has no historic significance. And an HRE, different HRE in this case, historic resource evaluation, is required to be submitted to the commission for review in order for that to be considered. The second point I wanted to make is with regard to what you said, Joanna, regarding, well, there might be instances where a demolition is appropriate. And, I think as we talk through this issue and work through it more, one example we can look at for possible ideas is our public nuisance ordinance. I mean, a house can be declared a public nuisance now under if certain findings can be made, but demolition is not the only cure to a nuisance. That nuisance can be repaired or restored, and that can cure the nuisance as well. So maybe we be looking at some way to incentivize repair or restoration so that demolition is the last resort rather than the first resort.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. Chris?
Yeah, I think my comments before were, I think, had jumped down to the next category on the bullet points. So I wanted to make sure that it's not just about the land trust, but it's about the lot splits. In addition, just 2 days ago, the city of Pasadena has nominated another 20 houses to the National Register between Bellefontaine and Columbia. In fact, some of those are actually in South, one or two of them are in South Pasadena. So that Pasadena is updating the National Register nominations because in fact, Caltrans is unaware of what is in fact historic, and most of their appraisals do not reflect that. The Story or Stearns Japanese garden is 3/4 privately owned and 1/4 owned by Caltrans. And in 2008, the private property owners nominated the entire garden to the National Register, and it was accepted and it's listed. And Caltrans has refused to acknowledge that in how they appraise selling the 1/4 back to the family that owns the 3/4. So I really want to say what Mark and Odom said are correct, is that we have to assume that Caltrans is going to do the wrong thing when it comes to historic properties. And so that we need to have greater local control. And again, this goes off to the next issue related to lot splits, but that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So Margaret, will you share your screen? I know that we've sort of added a topic. Just want to make sure that we at least have some record of it. So great, let's see. Okay, great. I think we've captured the bullet points. We'll do some organization of the information before it gets put back into public realm in our staff report. But I think we've got that point covered. I'm going to move on, and Sally, I'm going to read the next point, and you'll be the first to have a comment on it. So the next one is commit that no lot splits or zone changes other than those mandated by present or future state law will be granted to Caltrans surplus properties in the residential estate, RE, and residential single family, RS zones in the Altos de Monterey overlay zone, and that no demolitions of existing homes will take place in these zones. So Sally.
Thank you. Can I make a really short statement? We'll be short. So I live on Bonita Drive. So I live south of the high school, closer towards the LA El Sereno area of South Pasadena. And so in that area, we have very tight homes next to each other. We have multifamily homes, we have apartment buildings. So we have a plethora of different types of housing in my area. And of which we have probably about 12.5 Caltrans properties that are both tenant occupied and uninhabitable vacant properties. So we kind of have everything in our neighborhood here. So we will be disproportionately affected should this bill go through as is. I first kind of wanted to just thank the council members, Cacciati, Primuth, and Znaimer at their last council meeting, where they made it clear to hold a meeting with the community, in particular the South Pasadena Preservation Foundation, to further discuss their respective point of view about the proposed amendments. So thank you very much for those council members. And I also am a member of our Neighborhood Smart Committee, which is to try to make our Meridian Avenue safer for our kids and the neighbors when we cross Oak and Meridian Avenue. So I wanted to thank City Manager Joyce. The other day, that middle of the road sign was knocked off, and he made received he put a new one on very quickly. So I know that City Manager Joyce is very proactive, and so I wanted to thank him for that too. So at the beginning of the meeting, Mayor Mahmood had indicated some of the reasons why the Caltrans properties have kind of ramped up recently, but she didn't mention that last year in April in 2020 on our street on Bonita Drive, and Bonita Drive is a windy hillside area, we had professional squatters, or those, I believe they're called Reclaim Our Town or something like that. They actually tried to break into one of the Caltrans properties, and it was a duplex in which the upstairs tenants, a father and a teenage daughter, they heard noise because the downstairs duplex is vacant, and so these reclaimers try to break in. And so we had CHP, and because CHP has jurisdiction over the Caltrans properties, they came along with South Pass Police. And so during that time, April 2020, I contacted Mayor Joe and Linda Esposito, who's the neighbor who was very directly impacted by this. She spoke to a state legislator, and from all that, we were able to secure those Caltrans properties that were unoccupied by boarding the interior, because there were people who were trying to break into these properties. And because we understood in El Sereno, these things were happening, and it happened again Thanksgiving week to us too, that we knew that there was a huge problem with our neighborhood. So when we talk about what we're going to do with the Caltrans properties, I know for us in our neighborhood, we are longtime neighbors with the tenant occupied Caltrans tenants. And so whatever possibility there is for our neighbors to purchase their tenant occupied properties, we want that to happen. What we're very concerned about are the unoccupied, uninhabitable properties, which are several in our neighborhood. And so with that, we would like those properties sold to qualified buyers, not to be rented by a housing, or managed by a housing related entity to tenants. That's just transferring the slum lordship of Caltrans to another management company for a minimum of 55 years or whatever that provision is. We don't want that. We want these uninhabitable vacant properties to be sold to qualified buyers who can then rehab it, renovate it, and have it occupied for themselves. So for us, it's two separate issues, in terms of the tenant occupied and the unoccupied. And with the unoccupied, we just also want to make sure that our neighborhood is not, again, disproportionately affected by any type of zoning or permitting laws in which the city would then allow some kind of special variance or condition in which they can build it out, because most of the lots in our neighborhood are on the smaller than average side for South Pasadena, so less than 5,000 square feet. So to even entertain that it's going to be multi-housing or a duplex on a 4,000 square foot hillside is kind of unimaginable, because for many of us in our neighborhood who wanted to add onto our house, the city would say, sure, you can add on, but you could only add on 65 square feet, and you would have to have a 3-car garage or like space for 3 cars. And in our neighborhood, that's impossible to do. And so if we see that, let's say these unoccupied, uninhabitable Caltrans properties are now then available for that type of housing, that would, talk about the unfairness of, for our residents here. So that kind of goes into the last 2 bullet points for under the amendment from
Okay,
the
yeah.
Preservation Foundation.
Yeah, I think, there is a lot of, some problems, existing problems with the existing owner of the properties, Caltrans. There some concern about, future use and zoning, which is certainly brought up in this point here. And then the question of ownership and rental is what I heard. Does anyone else have anything to add on those topics and related to obviously this 7th point or 8th point, the commitment to no lot splits or zone changes? Anyone else? No? Okay. Margaret, would you like to share your screen? Does anyone have anything else to add from the bullet points that are shown here? Joanne?
Yes, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up there's 2 lots at the north end of Fairview in Odom's neighborhood. And I've talked to one, I think it's 215 Fairview. And I've talked to a neighbor of Odom's about it on multiple occasions. And I wanted to make sure I brought that up there. His and his neighbors concerned about what could be built on that large lot. And so I think they would be in favor of no lot splits, et cetera. It's all that we've been discussing about maxing out a property if it was owned by an agency or the city. That concern.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Can we also just add in Bonita Drive area residents, because it's Bonita Drive, it's Summit, it's Gillette Crescent, it's Oneonta, and we're all just packed in that particular area.
Margaret, you want to share your screen? Make sure we get that right. Bonita Drive area residents. Good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, at some point, if you want to just add in those other addresses at some point, so it's reflected in that way too. But
great. Thank you, Sally. So let's go on to we're getting close. We've got 9 and 10 to talk about, and then we can revisit. I know we wanted to revisit the side-by-side escrow and on Berkshire, as well as the general discussion of legislation and no legislation. So let's go on to the 9th point that was presented. Prohibit the subleasing of properties governed by an affordability covenant and the imposition of miscellaneous fees by an HRE, such that the total cost of renting the unit becomes unaffordable. Would someone like to start off with that? Joanne, and then Odom.
I believe that was put in there because of the experience with Esperanza. And we've heard for years, since when they first started renting, I talked to somebody who looked at one of the houses and she said, that is not affordable housing. And I can't remember the specifics of the exact amount of the rentals, but we've heard that from years from their tenants. And somebody told me that they had looked at one of the houses and the rent per se may look affordable, but then they tack on all these fees. You have to pay for the water and everything else. So ultimately it makes it unaffordable. And when they bought those houses from Caltrans, there's an affordability covenant on that deed, but it is not enforced. And that's something the city needs to look into, and somebody needs to be enforcing that.
Thank you, Joanne. Odom?
Yes, that's exactly what it's from. It's without outing the particular tenants, it's a management fee combined with the affordable rent that together exceeds what many people would consider affordable.
Thank you, Odom. Chris?
Yeah, they sometimes call it a landscaping fee as well, and it may actually exceed the amount of the rent. I did want to, I'm sorry I didn't put this up, but I wanted to jump back a category because I just called up the assessor's map for the lot across the street from Odom. And that is not one lot. Apparently there were multiple houses on that lot when Caltrans bought it and they tore them all down, so that something's going to have to be said about, and this may even be true in Sally's neighborhood. And I know it's true on Oneonta because I have a client up there, is that some of these lots were subdivided before Caltrans bought them, and one house was built and the other lots are still vacant. And so there's this problem of not, if you're only prohibiting future subdivisions without city control, and for example, I can see on the lot across from Odom, it looks like there's 7 or 8 lots over there that are in Caltrans ownership. And that's all looks on, if you look at it, it looks like one big vacant lot, but in fact, it's not. And there needs to be some additional city control over what happens to the, I don't know what you would call them, the shadow pre-subdivision of vacant lots. And like I said, like on Oneonta, I know that's true. And apparently it's true on Fairview as well.
Thanks, Chris.
There is one like that on Bonita and Gillette Crescent also.
Thank you. Do we have other comments, or should we have Margaret share her screen for, oh, we have one from Timothy Iverson.
Yeah, just really quickly, those aren't, Chris, wouldn't you say those are probably bungalow courts that were demolished?
I don't know. I mean, because if you look at the assessor's map, and anybody could call us up from but it's a 5317-007. But across the street from Odom, these are different lots of little lots. I don't think it was a bungalow court. I think it was houses that were there. Okay. And I think they 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think they tore down 8. They tore down 8 or 9 houses. That's my belief. And they're all kind of, some of them are very small, some of them are big. You know, one has 19,000 square feet. One has I don't know, 4,000 square feet. So it's kind of a mishmash. So that's this question of how the land is subdivided needs to be under a more general city control, or it's going to be a problem on at least these 2 neighborhoods. That's all I'm saying. You got to look at the details.
Thanks, Chris. Odom?
Yeah, without going too deeply into the weeds, this whole area was part of the original orange groves. I don't mean the street, I mean orange groves of the farmers from the Indiana colony. And a lot of them were orchard houses, including the one that's not even listed as historic on my street. I think it's 302. That the details have fallen away, but it's a Victorian era house. And there were people that lived there seasonally in the earliest days, and it's been developed over time. It was part of the A.O. Porter tract, and there are a lot of complicated land holdings, including my property, which is a flag lot that's on several lots.
Thank you, Odom. So do we want to have Margaret share her screen again? See if we're ready to move on to the last item. So it looks like we've got affordable rent should also take fees. Did we add the lots? It looks like we're adding, yep, the lots. Questions about the lot, the details, looking into the details of those lots in the item above. So great. So let's, Margaret, if you stop sharing your screen. Chris, did you have something? You got your hand up. Is that?
Oh, no, excuse me, that's
sorry.
a mistake.
Okay, and Sally, sorry, did you have something to add?
Just real quick, and you know, it's not, it doesn't fit perfectly in this bullet point that we're talking about right now, but just in general terms, I think also our neighborhood has concerns on if the city was going to manage an HRE or in any way, what happens afterwards, if it's still in city hands or an HRE, how the city will manage, you know, an entity like an HRE, that the city has like historically has had problems, you know, even managing Toby Peters, the hoarder on Meridian, or, you know, other issues that have happened, or even the relationship that the city has or has not had with Caltrans. It's hard for us in our neighborhood to believe that then if the city is coordinating or managing with an HRE, that would be done in a, you know, in an effective way, that we're going to have the same kind of problems that we're having with Caltrans.
I hear you. Thanks, Sally.
Thank
I
you.
just want to say, I hope we can do better than Caltrans. But we will certainly note that, because I understand, and you and I have been involved in that other.
I mean,
yeah, and we'll continue those discussions.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
outside
it's
of
a smile that we give each other because we know, you know, it's not easy at all.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. Richard?
I think the important point there is about the subleasing and allowing an owner to sublease to somebody else and increase the fees. So I think the subleasing is an important part of that.
Great. Margaret, do you want to share your screen? Make sure we get that on. And Adam, you want to say something while we're still on the topic?
Yeah, this topic is gives reason why the city is involved in that chain of transferring the property from Caltrans to a city-sponsored HRE to ensure that a regulatory agreement is in place in that transfer. So the city-approved HRE accepting the property would do so under the condition that they accept the regulatory agreement that spells out this subleasing issue and prohibiting unnecessary fees and breach of contract and everything else that goes into it in a standard regulatory agreement. But that's where that would be solved at.
Thank you, Adam. Margaret, I think the second bullet point, the concerns regarding how the city will manage an HRE in an effective way, I think, you know, including, you keep that there, just including, you know, code enforcement. Okay, great. So let's.
Can I add one more thing, Joanna?
Yes, and then Joanne.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I just
go ahead.
want to say really quickly, let's not get confused between the city managing the whole process versus setting up a separate HRE entity that would then be responsible for it. Community-based, controlled, local control, not city, but local control, and then ensuring that we hire experts that do that for a full-time vetted request for proposal experience and hiring with that local control board, choosing who gets to do that process.
Joanne?
Since we're talking about renting and management, et cetera, most of the people that I talk to are not in favor of the city being a manager of any sort. And what they would like the city to do is to facilitate the sales of the vacant ones to like 2002 Berkshire, or and not be in any sort of management. So if the city's housing related entity can facilitate all these things, fine, but the ultimate goal should be home ownership from everybody that I talk to, because of putting it back on the tax rolls, et cetera. And that the only rentals, as I see it, are the tenants that are entitled to stay in their house. They decide they don't want to buy and that they want to continue renting. And that is what 95% of the people that I talk to envision.
Thank you, Joanne. So I think we've got, it looks like it's 5:20 right now. I know that several of us have a hard stop at 6 o'clock. So I want to make sure that we have enough time to get back to a discussion about the the legislation of no legislation, as well as the Berkshire side by side. So we do have one more item to talk about. I just want everyone to be a little bit, just to be aware of that. Be efficient with your time, please. So this last item is establish a timeline for completion of the sales program. Who would like to start off? Chris.
So the two bills that passed in 2019, SB 7 and AB 29, both included language at the request of Caltrans that kept the freeway on the state map, even though it was gone until 2024. And I think Caltrans did that because there's a provision in the one, I think it's 112, 13, one in the Streets and Highways Code section that says once a property becomes surplus, Caltrans must sell it within a year. So there's an existing overarching state law. And the problem we have is that Caltrans has been repeatedly saying things since, the late 1990s that they're going to sell all these, within a short period of time. And they will say anything to anybody just to get them off the phone or to get them out of the meeting. But in fact, there is no, so far, there needs to be a hard, fast, enforceable deadline. Otherwise, that nothing's going to happen, because that's what Caltrans is best at doing. Nothing. And all of these things about, well, we need more regulations or we need something are all typical Caltrans excuses. And then again, go back to something Joanne said a while back. When we walked through those properties in 2013 with Secretary Kelly and Doherty, who was then the head of Caltrans and the head of the transportation agency, they had rehabbed that property on State Street, and they had artificially set the rent so high that it would never rent, right? They did it on purpose so they wouldn't have to deal with tenants. So they set the rent like at $5,000 a month, knowing, and it had been rehabbed in 2001, and it had stayed vacant for over 11 years at that point, and it's still vacant now 20 years later, because the Caltrans staff has the ability to sandbag the political process, and I just think we need something that's hard and fast. We really do.
Thank you, Chris. Does anyone else have any points to make about that? What I've heard is actually I've heard a lot of consensus on many of the items that are listed here, which is great to see. And still also a need to act in an immediate way, and perhaps feeling that the legislation wouldn't be immediate enough, and perhaps either a separate process that's not legislative or one that is parallel. So I just wanted to invite, I know Holly Watley has been listening, I think with a particular ear to understanding what the desires and needs are, goals are of the group. I want to invite her to talk a little bit about that question of legislation or not, and please continue to raise your hand if you have comments to add to what Holly has to offer.
Sure. I mean, certainly the one thing in listening to everyone's comments and input that is a deep theme is a dissatisfaction with the current process with Caltrans and a mistrust of Caltrans. So I think that really, in terms of just laying out, the legislative option versus the no legislative option, the no legislative option, which is what is the situation we are in right now. And we have had the one example of 626 Prospect, where we can say that certainly where we sit now, without any change, the city has the least control of, it has absolutely really no control. There is a limited ability in the way to challenge Caltrans decisions. And I've reviewed the regulations that applied to the proposal process, and they are ambiguous at best. In fact, as I'm sure everyone here knows, Caltrans, just they picked one property proposer, and then they decided, hey, we're going to redo the regs entirely. So right now, as we sit here, we don't know what the future regulations are going to be until that process gets going and is completed. So the current situation here with no legislation is the city has little control. The city doesn't know what the rules are. The city doesn't know how they are going to be applied with any consistency by Caltrans staff. And the city doesn't know how the rules are going to change. The legislative fix does the highest and best goal of it, and the thing that it can bring is it can take or diminish Caltrans' role in the process. It can increase the city's control. Now, whether or not the city exercises that control would be dealt with at a later time, under specific proposals or I'm sure robust policy discussions about how to exercise that control. What the legislation does, at least as of the draft I have reviewed, is it allows the city to choose, and it allows the city to have some confidence in the choice. It allows the city to have more flexibility in terms of whether it goes with an HRE that is of a more traditional legal setup, or perhaps one of the community trust fund, a community land trust option. It does allow the city to then work out the details with that HRE about regulatory enforcement and address these concerns people have about tenants subleasing for more than affordable prices and that type of thing. So it preserves the city's options, it makes them clearer, and then the city, how it chooses to exercise those options, it can be had another day under considering specific properties and a more robust discussion. So the no ledge situation, I think, leaves us where we are now, which if we can all agree on anything, it's a dissatisfaction with Caltrans, and the ledge addresses some of those concerns.
So Holly, before I move on to, we have Chris and Joanne and Odom all want to say something. I did hear reference to an agreement with the CTC, and I'm just wondering if you, and maybe we'll just, have Chris or Joanna or Odom explain what that is as a separate option other than the legislative option, and just trying to understand that a little bit better, whether it's a parallel effort or an additional one. That might help to get some clarity on that, unless you have something to add about that right now.
Just the one thing I note on that, without knowing more of the details, like I mentioned before, I do know that Streets and Highways Code Section 116 does allow Caltrans to delegate responsibility or management to cities. My concern about that, given all of the input from the panelists today, is that, again, it's Caltrans that decides whether to grant that authority. So it's not an issue of the language I heard. It's not so much an issue of the city taking control, as the language of that statute really says that the department can grant that. And it also says, and the department can take it back. So my concern is that seeing how the department has implemented the Roberti Act in ways that we really question that they're following the law, and certainly to the letter, much less the intent, whether they would, view Section 116, equally creatively. But the way I read that statute, the decision is with the department, and what they giveth, they can taketh away, and that's my concern. But there may be more details I hear, and I can revisit that thought.
Thank you, Holly. Chris, and then Joanne, and then Odom.
I wanted to give you the citation to the section regarding the 1-year deadline. It's 118.6 of the Streets and Highways Code. And again, it's from the date that they determine it to be surplus, but they define surplus as no longer necessary, so that we need something that holds their feet to the fire under that section. And I believe that the CTC, who is not part of Caltrans, but oversees Caltrans, and who is appointed by the governor and has 2 legislative committee ex officio members, that the CTC can say, and we've proposed this and we're hoping to send it through to a CTC member to get on the agenda in May, that they will not consider any sale of these properties in these 3 zip codes unless Caltrans does the following things first, and that the CTC can hold a hammer over Caltrans and say, this is what we want. And if you propose to us to sell 626 to someone other than the city's approved HRE, we're not going to go for it. If you propose to sell a vacant lot to be developed to something, we're not going to. So the CTC, through the political influence of the senators and the legislators and the city councils, can step up, because the CTC at the meeting on January 27th of this year, 2 of the members, including the chairman, said to Caltrans on these properties, why don't you just give these properties to the city? And there was no answer from Caltrans. The CTC says, these are not going to be a freeway. They're not part of your portfolio. Give them to the cities, get them out. So it's clear that the CTC is frustrated with Caltrans, as everybody is. So that if we quickly, right now, today's the 14th, if the city were to send a letter to members of the CTC, apparently one of the members lives in Eagle Rock, and apparently Charles knows her, and we can try to get this on the agenda for May or June and have the CTC use their statutory power to force Caltrans to behave. There's a lot of issues here. And if the legislative delegation and the cities and the CTC are in line, I don't believe Caltrans will take back any authority. They will just cower. If we act today as Senator Roberti did in the 1970s and 1980s, we, the tenants, the cities, the neighbors, will all get the right result and eliminate these misbehaving people from the process. That's my belief. And again, look at 118.6 of the Streets and Highways Code.
Thanks, Chris. Joanne?
Yes, I want to talk about the legislation that killed the freeway. And Mary Urquhart says this, and it's exactly true. That legislation, Senator Portantino, and then a similar bill by Assemblymember Holden, went all through the process for months. It was all great. And then at the end, Caltrans said to both of the legislators, if you don't include language, the 2024 language, like it won't be dead until 2024, actually, so it's actually not quite dead yet, then we will oppose the bill when it gets to the governor's desk. So they strung everybody along, seeming to agree, this is Caltrans, and then at the last minute they dropped that bomb. And as Mary Urquhart said, the same thing could happen with this legislation, and any legislation is highly speculative at best. And at the end, they could just add a paragraph or a sentence at the end and do the same thing. If you don't add this to the legislation, we're going to oppose it when it gets to the governor's desk. So that's why when Joanna after she had talked to somebody at Caltrans in Sacramento about the 626 proposal, and we were discussing it, I had a similar discussion with Charles, they were frustrated, as they should be, we all are. And the immediate thought was, because of our past experience, we have to go over their head. And Caltrans has a couple of bosses here. The main one, the governor, his secretary, the appointee, the head of Caltrans, and the CTC. And, you know, you don't win the lottery unless you buy a ticket. And trying what we're talking about is buying the ticket, and you may win the lottery. Only I think you'd have a better chance than with the California lottery, quite frankly. But anyway, it's something we have to try. It's been tried in the past. And unfortunately, I don't think Holly has the benefit, and other people on this call have the benefit of the institutional memory and what's been done over the years, and how in every legal case, the city has won. And we shouldn't have to get to that point, but we use that past history as leverage for a discussion. That's what we're talking about. And as I've always said, that if everybody's in the room together talking, as with that meeting that Portantino called with the secretary and the head of Caltrans and 25 other people, everybody was in agreement. And it was just, we didn't have Anthony in the assembly to bird dog the getting the houses sold 8 years ago in 5 years. So I think we should at least try.
Thanks, Joanne. Odom?
Yes, picking up exactly where Chris and Joanne left off. Essentially, we have been frustrated, very frustrated with legislation on a number of issues that at the last minute have been gutted and amended so that it becomes either something completely different than what was meant, or substantially watered down. And we worry about this as a legislative tool happening to this bill, which is why we keep coming back to the mantra of no bill is better than a weak bill. And I say this because I want to reiterate what Chris said about the 1-year deadline. And for the first time, it's not for us to bring something to legislation to try to rein this process in. It's actually Caltrans over a barrel, essentially on an anvil, when their 2024 deadline hits, having to have done something, or we can take them to court and force them to sell under the existing law. We don't have to do anything other than follow the law. They're actually the ones that need to come in good faith and negotiate with us. So while again, I think the legislative process is worth pursuing if we can negotiate all these points really airtight, but at the end of the day, we're in a better position than Caltrans if we just wait them out.
Thank you. Timothy?
Yeah, and just following on that, I mean, it might even be worth some of the people on this call going back to that CTC meeting video, because of course, now that everything's on Zoom, all of these conversations are recorded in perpetuity. And there were some interesting features to it. I mean, obviously the two CTC board members who clearly in their own language articulated the idea that, you know, why don't we just take this program away from you? But not only that, the new District 7 director, Tony Tavares, although he made a very kind of coherent and polite presentation, he did end his presentation by saying, and I quote, "We welcome an exit strategy."
Oh.
And the idea that there wasn't one, that he didn't perceive there to be one already, was kind of mind-boggling. But the idea that they needed a way out and they needed someone to tell them what to do, I thought was very interesting. And those are his own words. And that's funny because I remember at least a year or two ago hearing Chris literally say the same thing, saying that Caltrans needs someone to tell them what to do. And lo and behold, that's exactly what they want. And they want, so when the CTC had this discussion of like, you know, we're considering actually giving your project to general services or, you know, X other solution, he basically said, thank you. So that should be taken into consideration. And we haven't had a meeting with him yet, but we have asked him for a meeting and he has acknowledged the existence of that offer, but we haven't had a meeting.
Thank you, Timothy. Joanne, and I just want to say before we continue, it's 5:40, we have 20 minutes. Do want to have a little time to wrap up, but of course we also want to make sure we have a full discussion. So, Joanne.
Okay, that statement about giving them away to the cities is also been expressed, and I can't say by whom, to whom, but it's a Caltrans official had said that, and someone that had he been able to move forward with that, it would have happened. So it's out there, it's been out there. We've all known that they're looking for an exit strategy. So in a meeting with John Belisky, the District 7 director, a year and a half ago, I proposed some of the things we've been talking to today. He was very interested. He said, yes, I'd like to have a meeting with some people, but I will set up the meeting. So collected the names. And then, we were getting along to get to a meeting, and then the pandemic happened. But there are good guys in Caltrans. I know Rick is probably going to disagree. We've been having that discussion. And I think we've got some really good ideas here, and they need an elegant exit strategy. And I think we at least need to try having the discussion that I don't think we've been able to have yet, because there's enough out there to pull it all together. And as far as going on beyond this meeting, I think there's some issues that we can't discuss publicly that would benefit the city if we had a further discussion and ways to enable some of these things, but I don't think it should be done publicly.
Thanks, Joanne. So Mary and then Richard.
I'm very encouraged by this call. Rather than being dictated to on what can happen and not letting the stakeholders be a part of this meeting is allowing for it. I do agree with Joanne as well. And I think that we do need to sit down and meet, and it may be, that there are 20 of us and talk about this with if Christy Lopez could be there as well. If we get all these things in the bill, great, we've got it, but we have to have this negotiation on the side. And Anthony is amazing at this. We had the Department of Transportation involved as well. It's been done before. It was done, 24 years ago? I don't know the exact year, but this was done before and it was very effective. We can't have these discussions out in an open forum because you're not going to get Caltrans to commit. You're not going to get the Department of Transportation to commit. The city can't make certain statements. So if we could work together on this, guided by Anthony, he is amazing at this and we need him. This is what we really need him for. Get all this wording in the bill. It looks like we're getting much, much closer, and try to work that out. We could get a lot of this done, and he can always pull the bill and put something else in, or pull the bill if we're successful.
Thank you, Mary. I want to make sure we hear from Richard, but I also see Christy Lopez has her hand up. Richard?
Well, my feeling is that we really have to pursue both tracks. I really want to see if CTC will respond to the city, as Chris Sutton has suggested, that we write them a letter and call on them to jump in on this and take some action. But I think we should pursue the legislation with all the fine comments that were made today and use that as leverage. If we don't get our satisfaction from the CTC, and we'll never get it from Caltrans, then we're going to go through the legislative route. And I understand the hazards of going through legislation with things that can happen at the end, amendments, et cetera. But I think we should have a dual track here and really pursue the CTC, but also keep the legislation going.
Thank you, Richard. Christy?
Hi. Yes, I just wanted to generally comment on all of the points that were raised this afternoon, and wanted to kind of sum up what I'm hearing the community say to ensure that I am getting that information back to Anthony in the most simplistic and best way. And so what I'm hearing is two options. We have a legislative option that we can take, which would be to continue pursuing making amendments in the bill. With regards to the topics that were brought up this afternoon as suggestions to the amendments, I have heard all of those. We'll take them back to Anthony, and he and I can have a kind of a discussion about what next steps will be, but understand that in vetting with Anthony, I will have to also vet with Caltrans. I'll also have to vet with the administration. It's going to be it's going to be a bit of back and forth, but I think that I can say confidently that the senator will want to propose anything in this bill that has the full consensus of the community.
Oh, Christy, you went on mute. Oh.
Throughout the vetting process, there may be some things that may stick and some things that may not stick. But I think, as evidenced by prior legislation that Anthony has done and that our office has worked on, we are going to get to as close as the best option as we can get. And yes, and so I just want to make sure that I'm saying that I'll take these things back to Anthony. We'll talk about it. I will vet it appropriately, and will be like, hey, these are all of the items that they want in the bill, and then we will work from there. I just don't want to guarantee that all of the points that were brought up are going to be included, because I haven't had those full conversations about these ideas. Secondly, the second option I'm hearing is to kind of go the negotiation route and have Anthony have high-level conversations with folks in the administration and at the CTC to see if there is a non-legislative option, which would be through that contract idea that Mr. Sutton had brought up earlier. And I will research those. One other thing I wanted to research, the CTC contract, government code 118.6. I'll look into that to see if we can, that with respect to the timeline. Otherwise, I'm open to any comments or questions that anyone else might have, but I think that I've gotten a very good flavor of where you guys would like to go, and just need to know that the community has the support of the bill and that the council is supportive of some of the points that were brought up today, and our office is more than happy to move forward to ensure the best possible outcome for the entire community. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. I see Mayor has her hand up, and then Joanne.
Thank you. I have a quick, first of all, I think this has been very productive. Thank you all for your time. Previously, Dr. Schneider had suggested that, among other things, the bill be amended to permit the city to sell historic properties at fair market value, with the proceeds then dedicated to affordable housing. I don't think I saw that among your listed points, and I was wondering if that was still a concept that you suggested, that you are supportive of.
Sorry, Diana, I don't mean to jump out of turn, but it was covered in our preamble as opposed to a point.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks, Soda. Mayor, you finish? I move on to Joanne.
I'm wondering, yeah, Christy, this is for you. When you're talking to Anthony about this discussion we've been having today, my main point is that he think about the meeting we had in our library community room with Secretary Kelly and District Director Caltrans Director Doherty. That is the model for what I'm talking about. And it wasn't where you go to the CTs, you know, everybody was there and we were having a discussion. What is the best approach? As opposed to, these are the things we want, and what do you think? Because I don't think you get where you want to go that way. I think we need to have, a lot of these points need to be clarified, refined, and put into a better, maybe a better proposal than what we're doing here, you know, kind of throwing things around. I think if we could make it better as a proposal and more to the elegant exit approach. And
I believe.
And then also we need to talk about, and this will have to be obviously after today, the side-by-side escrow process and how it is allowed and not illegal, as was stated earlier. So is there some way we can like move on to have at some point a further discussion before the council meeting on the 21st?
Before the 21st?
I guess that's more of a conversation with the city to go to Anthony, as more information to go to Anthony, because that needs to be clarified for sure.
Right, but remember that there is time for that. The legislative process allows for that. And so during the legislative process, we will bring up all of these points and will be in conversations with Caltrans, the CTC, the community, and the city to ensure that we're all on the same page, so that there's still time for that. We have until about August essentially, really, to get something to the governor's desk. So I think that there's definitely time for further conversations as we go through the process, and we'll amend a couple of times until we get to a place that everyone agrees on. And if we don't get to a place and we don't agree on something, then as has been stated before, there's the option to not proceed with the legislative option.
Well, I guess, okay, that I agree with that, but I guess my comment is for the city, and before the 21st, I think at least the point about the side-by-side escrow needs to be clarified.
You know, Joanne, that strikes me as perhaps a conversation best held between the two lawyers.
No, well, not necessarily, yes, okay, fine, but why can't we expand that? Because it's an issue that others of us know about, because we were involved along with Sean in the sale of 2002 Berkshire. And there are some points that I cannot bring up that are confidential that I would prefer. I mean, yes, it needs to be a different conversation, but why is it just the two lawyers? I think other people need to be involved too.
So may I offer, we have just 7 minutes left. It doesn't look like we're going to get to the 3 questions that came in the Q&A, but we will be able to address those certainly in our communications prior to the meeting on the 21st. But I do want to really quick have Margaret share the screen and just get some final points on record here. And then we can have some agreement if we've captured the conversation. And we should add on to that we need to continue discussion about the side-by-side escrow. So if everyone just take a minute. Joanne, your hand is still raised. I don't know if you have something else to say. Nope. Does anyone have anything to add? Adam?
We've proposed, at least in the SB 381 legislation, that the concurrent escrow would be allowed. Whether that's currently allowed by law or not, we're proposing legislation would allow it.
So we have 5 minutes left. I want to offer if the mayor or council member Donovan have any closing words. But before I do that, I just wanted to say thank you. We've had really great input and history, and we've got some really good notes to reconcile. It sounds like there is a lot of consensus on what was discussed today. Certainly some more discussion about how to get there, but also heard that there's an interest from this group to take parallel tracks forward. But mostly just wanted to say thank you for your time and for this discussion, and that it be the first in many, I think, as we continue forward together. So with that, I wanted to let the mayor have a word, and Councilmember Donovan is part of the subcommittee. Donovan, you're on mute. Still on mute. There you go.
I just want to thank everybody for being here. It's been, for me, it's been extremely educational. I've learned a lot. I think that we meeting other people other than the people with the city, myself, Diane, the staff, have learned a lot, and we'll go over it in detail, and we can definitely improve what we've been proposing all along. Again, thank you. It's been a long meeting, and I know that I still feel that we have a good bill with some changes. And we could still, as Dr. Snyder said, we could still pursue both processes. Thank you.
Mayor?
Thank you. Yes. And thank you to all who have obviously spent a lot of hours, not only today, but also previously in the development of what you have submitted. That's really important. I'm very encouraged. I do sense that we are making progress. And I would also like to thank Joanna, who I think did an excellent job of facilitating for us today. So thank you, Joanna, for a job well done.
Of course.
And thank you all. We'll obviously have a lot more conversations. This is a very complex topic.
Great. With that, thank you all. And goodbye.
Thank you.